Paris, 1677. A woman in fine silk is dragged through the mud toward a wooden scaffold. She was once a beloved mistress, a hostess of salons, a secret keeper to the nobility. Now she will burn for murder, sorcery, and possibly worse. This isn't a fairy tale. It's not even fiction. It's one of the darkest chapters in France's golden age, when the most powerful court in Europe was nearly brought down by a conspiracy of witches, poisoners, and desperate aristocrats. They called it the Age of Enlightenment. But in the shadows of Versailles, another age reigned, one of fear, ambition, and blood. How far would you go to keep the king's love? How many would you kill to stay at his side? This is the true story of the affair of the poisons, where powdered wigs met powdered arsenic, and France's grandest courtiers turned to black mass, betrayal, and ritual murder to cling to power. To understand how France descended into poison and paranoia, you must first understand the man at the center of its universe, the Sun King. Louis XIV didn't just rule France. He was France. At just 5 years old, he inherited the crown. By the time he turned 40, he had transformed the monarchy into something closer to a religion, with himself as both Pope and God. Versailles wasn't built as a home. It was built as a stage, where every wall reflected his power, and every noble became an actor in a performance of loyalty. To rise at Versailles was to rise in his presence. Every glance from the king, every word, every favor, it was currency. And the price of being ignored? Exile, poverty, irrelevance. So they danced, they flattered, they seduced. Versailles became a court of masks, beauty, wit, elegance, but behind it all, endless fear. Fear of aging, fear of rivals, fear of being replaced. And when power was everything, and the king's favor could vanish in a day, some were willing to kill for a role in the spotlight. Among them stood a woman named Madame de Montespan, witty, dazzling, and deeply afraid of being forgotten. And in her desperation to keep the king's heart, she would descend into a world even the Sun King couldn't illuminate. She was everything a courtier dreamed of being. Beautiful, sharp-tongued, confident, Françoise Athénaïs de Rochechouart de Mortemart, known to history as Madame de Montespan, wasn't just another mistress. She was the mistress, the one who tamed the Sun King. Montespan didn't merely share the king's bed. She shared his influence. She bore him 7 children. She presided over court ceremonies, influenced policies, and decided who rose and who fell. Even her enemies admitted she was irresistible, and she knew it. But Versailles is a fickle audience, and power, no matter how radiant, always fades. As the years passed, new women arrived, younger, quieter, more pious. Chief among them was Madame de Maintenon, Montespan's former governess, now rising in favor and in the king's affections. Montespan felt the center of her world slipping. And at Versailles, to lose the king was to lose everything. She tried everything. More extravagant gowns, clever banter, even moments of staged humility, but none of it worked. The king was drifting. And so, in secret, the king's mistress sought help not from priests or poets, but from poisoners and witches. To keep Louis's heart, she would offer prayers not to God, but to the devil. While Versailles glittered, Paris festered. In its winding alleys and unlit corners, a different kingdom flourished, one of smoke, whispers, and blood. And at the center of it was Catherine Monvoisin. but to those who feared or needed her, she was simply La Voisin. Nominally a midwife and fortune-teller, La Voisin was in truth the high priestess of Paris's criminal underworld, the mastermind behind a network of alchemists, abortionists, forgers, charlatans, and killers for hire. She offered everything Versailles could not: solutions to inconvenient pregnancies, elimination of abusive husbands, promises of love and vengeance delivered in liquid form. Her poisons had names: poudre de succession, inheritance powder, a polite phrase for aristocratic murder. Her rituals were darker still. La Voisin offered black masses. In some, animals were sacrificed. In others, infants. These were not isolated acts. This was a market, thriving in the shadows of the Sun King's realm and protected by the silence of its powerful clients. La Voisin kept records. She had clients in high places: duchesses, cardinals, and yes, the king's own mistress. To the world, Montespan remained the glittering queen of the king's heart. But in the dark, she begged La Voisin for love powders, and worse. There were whispers that she took part in black masses where she lay naked while priests desecrated the Eucharist above her, that she offered the blood of infants for charms, that she plotted to poison the king himself if he left her. Were these confessions true or tortured fantasies? The truth lay buried until one death forced the entire rotten world into the light. The unraveling began with a noblewoman and 3 cups of hot chocolate. Her name was Marie de Brinvilliers, charming, elegant, devout. She also poisoned her father and her 2 brothers, and may have tested her mixtures on hospital patients, just to perfect the dosage. Her trial in 1676 captivated France. The details were lurid, the confessions horrific. Under torture, she claimed she was not alone, that there was a whole society of poisoners, hidden in plain sight. To the king, this wasn't just scandal, it was threat. If noblewomen could poison their own blood, what stopped them from poisoning his? And so, Louis ordered a secret war. He turned to Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, a brilliant, severe magistrate who would become Paris's first chief of police. La Reynie was methodical, relentless, a man who believed that order could be restored by pulling every secret into the light, no matter how dirty. He assembled a team, recruited spies, bribed informants, and soon discovered that Brinvilliers was just the beginning. The arrests began quietly. A servant here, an alchemist there. But by spring of 1679, it was clear. Something massive was festering beneath the surface of French nobility, and at the heart of it all was the name that no one dared say aloud. Not yet. Not even La Reynie. The investigation had begun, and once it started, it would be impossible to stop. As the list of suspects grew, it became clear. The regular courts could not handle what was coming, so the king created a tribunal unlike any other. A court that operated in silence, its doors locked, its records sealed, its judgments final. It was called the Chambre Ardente, the burning chamber, and it would decide who lived, who died, and who simply disappeared. Presided over by La Reynie and a hand-picked panel of judges, the Chambre Ardente interrogated hundreds. Some were tortured, some were bribed. Many simply talked, desperate to escape the noose. And those names were everything. They came from all corners of the elite, marquises who wanted inheritance, ladies in waiting desperate for love, even clergy seeking advancement. Nobility paid fortunes for poison, to rid themselves of rivals, lovers, and sometimes even their own children. This wasn't gossip. It was a pandemic of murder, spreading through the upper crust like perfume. Between 1679 and 1682, over 400 people were investigated. At least 36 were executed. Dozens more were exiled. Some were quietly imprisoned for life, without trial. And yet, despite the executions, despite the raids, the rot went higher. Whispers had reached the throne. A name had surfaced in testimonies, not just any name. Her name, the king's most beloved mistress, the mother of his children. And now, a suspect. The poison affair was no longer about Paris's underworld. It had breached the golden walls of Versailles, and Louis XIV was about to face the most dangerous question of his reign. What happens when the scandal touches the crown? It was the name La Reine didn't want to see. The name the king feared hearing. The name that could burn Versailles to the ground. Under torture, La Voisin finally cracked. Her voice hoarse, her limbs broken, she whispered it. She claimed Montespan had been one of her most loyal clients, that she had purchased aphrodisiacs and spells to seduce the king, that she had attended black masses where infants were sacrificed and prayers were offered to Lucifer, all to hold Louis's love. She said Montespan even plotted to kill the king. If she could not have him, no one would. La Voisin was not alone. Other poisoners, when questioned, spoke of her too. They described rituals, powders, bribes, threats. Some said she offered money to poison Madame de Maintenon, her rising rival. Montespan denied everything. She was never arrested, never publicly accused. But she knew, the king knew, Louis was devastated, not just by the alleged crimes, but by what they revealed, that the woman he had once adored may have turned to the devil to keep him. But if Montespan was guilty, condemning her would mean condemning himself, for loving her, trusting her, fathering her children. And so, Louis made a choice. He silenced the investigation. La Voisin was executed, burned in public in 1680. Others vanished into distant prisons, and Montespan slowly disappeared from court. She was never formally charged, but she was never forgiven. Her fall was slow, silent, and absolute. Louis XIV had always seen himself as a god king, a divine monarch, the sun that made all things grow and all shadows vanish. But now, that sun had been eclipsed. If the allegations were true, they were unspeakable. If they were false, they were still devastating. To pursue justice meant unleashing scandal. To expose Montespan meant implicating himself in love, in trust, in blindness. So Louis chose silence. He ordered the tribunal closed. The Chambre Ardente was disbanded. Records were destroyed. Many suspects, even those convicted, were quietly shipped to remote prisons under sealed orders. No trial, no release. They became ghosts of the king's conscience, living reminders of the truths he buried. Montespan, stripped of favor, watched as her rival, Madame de Maintenon, rose in her place, not with seduction, but scripture. Eventually, Montespan left Versailles. She entered a convent, not in chains, not in disgrace, but in silence. She had once ruled the court. Now she ruled nothing but memory. The scandal faded, but Versailles would never be the same. The affair of the poisons had exposed something the king never wanted the world to see, that beneath the powdered faces and polished shoes, the court had been rotting. Over 30 people were executed. dozens more were imprisoned without trial. And an untold number simply vanished, swallowed by the king's need for control. The Chambre Ardente was erased from official record. La Voisin's name was never spoken again in court. Even Montespan, for all her power, was written out of history with surgical precision. But Louis had learned a lesson, one he would never forget. That love can't be controlled, but people can. From that day forward, Versailles became a place of ritualized obedience. The balls still sparkled, the gardens still bloomed, but no one moved without calculation. No one spoke without fear. Even love became regulated. The king married Madame de Maintenon, quietly, without fanfare. His passion cooled, his court stiffened. The fire had burned, and now only ash remained. And yet, somewhere deep beneath that marble palace, the echo of whispered names never truly faded. They called it the greatest court in Europe, a miracle of art, politics, and civilization. But Versailles was never a paradise. It was a performance. It was a place where appearances were everything, where a smile could hide a dagger, a prayer could mask a curse, and love could rot into fear. Louis XIV survived the scandal. He tightened his grip. He silenced the guilty. He burned the records. But he never forgot. He had built a kingdom on spectacle and nearly lost it to shadows. Power seduced them. Fear consumed them. And in the end, the mask slipped. History remembers the Sun King for his palaces, his wars, his grandeur. But behind the golden curtain, the court of Louis XIV was one of the most dangerous places a person could love, live, or lose.